Well, good morning, good morning. Welcome to the Owen County Chamber of Commerce third legislative breakfast of the year. My name is Marcy King, and I'd like to welcome you this morning. As I was exiting my home, I was like, what luck. We are in our third legislative breakfast, and we do not have ice, sleet, or, and then I said it, snow. So sorry about the snow. I guess I accidentally ordered something. But so at any rate, I want to begin this morning by just thanking our sponsor. We have our Edward Jones, Marcus Robinson is our sponsor for this morning's legislative breakfast, and our host, the Owen Valley Christian Fellowship. So let's give them a hand and thank them. Now, how many of you remember the old Chambers Restaurant and having the legislative breakfasts down there in the old breakfast? Do any of you remember that? Please tell me you do, because it's just me. All right. Oh, it's just me. Well, when I was 16, my sister would drag me down to the legislative breakfast at the old Chambers Restaurant. And I remember sitting there thinking, this is my Saturday. Why am I here? I am never going to do this when I am an adult. And lo and behold, here we are. But the reason I bring that up is because I just want to announce to everyone here today that the Chamber of Commerce is moving, and we are moving into the old Chambers Restaurant. So the Chamber's new home will be the Chambers Restaurant. But when we get that done, hope to everybody come and have an open house. So very exciting about that. So this morning, we are joined by Senator Roderick Bray, Senator Eric Bassler, and Representative Bob Heaton. And of course, as always, our moderator this morning is our County Council member, Anton Neff. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Anton, and we'll get started this morning.
Good morning, everybody. So here we are, the third of our series already, and we have snow outside. Well, we have done enough of these, and I know pretty much everybody in the audience to the point that I think we'll keep our introductions brief. I will say that there's a couple of resources, again, that I think that you might want to check out. One of them is online. That's iga.in.gov. That's the website where you can access everything about every bill and committee and other details of our legislative session that might be handy if you want to follow along. I had a conversation with Senator Bassler before we started, and one of the things that's evident on the back of a flyer that the senators have put together is that 91% of the bills received bipartisan support. And that's very telling. A lot of times we only hear about the most controversial of items, but that's only scraping the surface as far as the amount of legislation and the type of things that our legislators work on. And it's a good figure to see when you're looking at that kind of level of bipartisan support. Also, here in the following section, we're going to have Q&A, and I do want to mention that it is always important that we remain civil, of course, and have a good discussion. That's going to be to the benefit of everybody. And we also appreciate those that are viewing online that are joining us this morning. And we will take questions from folks that are watching, and Marcy will help with that. So let's jump right in. If we'll have each of our guests say a few words about the session. We'll then switch over to Q&A. And I'll also say that a significant point or milestone in the session occurred a couple weeks ago. Bills that had passed the House went to the Senate and vice versa. And therefore, a lot of them are now reviewing bills that they've never seen before and came from the opposite chamber, and that always makes for interesting viewpoint and discussion. So with that, Senator Bray, you want to start us off?
Yeah, happy to. Anton, thank you very much. Pleased to be here again this morning. And Marcy, I don't know if we blame the snow on you then if you kind of jinxed us or not, but as I left Martinsville, there wasn't any snow. By the time I got to Peregrine, it was snowing pretty well, but you just never know in March, I think. So I'll talk a little bit about a couple of quick things and then pass it on, and then we'll get some question and answer. But as Anton said, we are moved past the first half of the legislative session. Our Senate agenda items passed now, and they're over in the House, and the House's agenda items are over in the Senate, and we're working on those. And we joke from time to time to say, well, okay, now the House is going to go fix what we did, and vice versa. And anytime you file a bill in the legislature, you've got 149 people that are going to try and make it better for you. And that is part of the frustration of the process, but it's also part of the process and why it works. To just quickly to Anton's point about 92% of the bills passed with bipartisan support. In the 10 years that I've been here, that has always been the case. It's frankly a source of pride that I take. Another statistic that is interesting is right about 60 to 65% of the bills, not only do they have bipartisan support, but they're unanimous with every Republican and every Democrat voting for them. And that kind of speaks, I think, to the process a little bit. If normally a bill is not just filed in January and it's the first time anyone has talked about it. It's discussed for quite a while leading up to that, drafted, crafted, talked to other legislators. And the bottom line is you've got people on both sides of the aisle working toward trying to get to a good goal. And most of the time we get that done. Not always, and we have always every year a handful of really polarizing issues. But by and large, the General Assembly of the State House of Indiana works pretty well together. And I think there's a lot of value in that. So just real quickly, you may recall, and from the last time that I was here, I didn't make the last one because I was up in Greencastle for that event, but I went through kind of the buckets of priorities that the Senate had, and I'll run through those just quickly. One is fiscal responsibility. It's a budget year. The House has now sent their budget over to the Senate, and we're working on that. Passing a balanced budget that spends within our means is job one every budget year, and that's certainly the case this year. Additionally to that, we've got a tax commission that was going to work on taking a 2-year study over our taxes, both our property taxes, which are kind of challenging to keep affordable for folks, but also for our income tax, to see if we can get to a space and restructure our tax system. Maybe we can get rid of the income tax. That's a hard challenge to do. That's $7.5 billion. We'd have to find somewhere else in some way, shape, or form. The other possibility is that we've begun to discuss through this tax commission, not this session, but does it make sense to get rid of, and can we afford to get rid of the property tax on homestead? So if somebody's first house, no property tax on that. I'm sure that Anton and every local government person would first think, wait a minute, because that local government, every dollar of property tax goes to local government. But so we would need to figure that out and make sure that that is backfilled in some way, shape, or form. But the challenge for people, and as they may find out this year, because home values across the state have increased when they get their bill on April 10th, is that those property taxes probably will have gone up in a lot of jurisdictions. And if you are retired and no longer have an income, but you've had a house for 20 or 30 years, we don't want you in a position where you can no longer afford that house because the property taxes have gone up. Those are challenges that we want to try and avoid and fix. So we're going to study through that. Another piece of the buckets that we're talking about is health care, and those are really in two separate pieces. One is mental health, very, very important to do, and we're trying to kind of really restructure the way we deliver mental health and public health as well. In any way you count Indiana, we kind of lag in the public health metrics that as you measure them, both in funding and also in the results, which I think there's obviously a direct correlation there. And so we're going to try and do in a responsible way to change the way we deliver those public health dollars so that the state can be collaborative and work with the local governments. No county would ever have to be forced to do anything here. They can decide to continue to go on their own like they have been, but there is some funding that we'll be able to provide if the county chooses to. And we're not talking about anything fancy. It's really blocking and tackling to deal with obesity, to deal with diabetes, to deal with maternal and infant mortality and things of that nature. And by the way, the tragic thing to talk about maternal mortality. When I first started to hear about that number, you'd think that it is a woman who dies during childbirth, but nearly all of those maternal mortalities are a woman that dies after childbirth, and the death is because of suicide or overdose, not anything else. And so that gets back to the mental health piece that we're talking about. So those are super important. And then another thing I find myself spending a lot of time on is the cost of health care. We've been negotiating and working with the hospitals across the state of Indiana, as well as the insurance companies across the state of Indiana, as well as pharmaceutical companies, all in an effort to try and make sure that health care becomes more affordable here in Indiana. We're a bit of an outlier, especially when it comes to healthcare costs in hospitals for inpatient and outpatient care. We're a low-cost state in every other sector of the economy except for that one, and there isn't any reason we need to be an outlier for high healthcare costs. So we're working pretty hard on that, and I'm happy to get into some detail on that if you're interested in it. Public safety, we're going to make sure we pay our state police more than we have over the last several years, as well as we've got a proposal that the House has now to, with regard to bail or bond if someone gets arrested, if they can be shown by the prosecutor and convince a judge that they are a significant danger to society because of, not necessarily even because of their charge, then they can be held without bond. Otherwise, they get a bond, which is required today with everything except for murder and treason. It's not a new concept. About 25 other states do it, and the federal government does it as well, but that's something we're working on pretty hard. And then finally, the last piece is a data privacy piece, so that you'll be able to know and then have some control over what happens to your data when it's out there on the internet. Happy to answer any questions in more detail about those, but I'll stop there and let Senator Bassler take it from here.
Very good. Thank you, Senator Bray. If my comments are not as lucid today as they are sometimes, it has to do with the fact that I was up way too late watching the IU basketball game last night. That was much past my bedtime. I couldn't believe what time it actually started. When my son told me that, I thought, you got to be kidding me. It started at like, I don't know, 10:30 or something like that. But anyway, happy to be here and happy to have all of you here. Thank you, Anton, for continuing to MC and to the Chamber for continuing to lead the charge on having this. You know, like Senator Bray said, we're now working through the House bills. A lot of my involvement has to do more so with money issues. I mean, I do get involved with policy discussions and so forth, but we had our K-12 funding committee hearing on Thursday, and it was a long hearing. It was about 5 hours, and they tend to be long because there's anywhere from probably 80 to 120 people that tend to testify at that each time we have it. And so those are the things I'm involved with. We have started going through the House has passed the budget over to our side now, and just this past week we started sitting down and kind of going through kind of almost line item by line item. You know, the House wants to do X, and we think, yeah, well, that's a great idea, or maybe we think, well, we want to tweak that a little bit. So we're kind of working through that process. We started that this past week. And I've got a few bills, but these are really mundane, boring bills. They tend to be trying to, for example, I'm working on some bills related to State Board of Accounts and another related to local government finance. And in some ways, these are the more mundane things that we do as a legislature, and those are the ones that tend to get broad bipartisan support, if not unanimous support, because we're just trying to improve some of the functionings of government at the local level. And then from the State Board of Accounts, from an audit perspective, to be sure that taxpayers' money are being taken good care of, and not have nefarious things go on with them. So those are the things I'm continuing to be involved with. I'm happy to take any questions that you have about any issue, but again, I'm more involved with kind of the numbers things. So, and I appreciate that Edward Jones was the sponsor, because I'm also an Edward Jones financial advisor. I don't know if anybody knew that, but I'm glad they're sponsoring this today. So, Bob, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Senators and Anton and others. And, I think that about covers it. Anybody got any questions? No, it is a situation, and I tell you what, this second half of the long session, we're kind of, in the House, we're kind of moving just a little bit slower. I don't know what the Senate, they may be doing the same, but we, as Anton mentioned to me earlier about Ways and Means, and he was concerned about, or interested in a couple bills, Senate Bill 325 and also Senate Bill 74, that deals with local funding and so forth, but next week we'll get more involved with some of the Senate bills and Ways and Means and in the House. But I know last month there was some issues with the Senate Bill 486, I think it was. That was part of education and so forth. Haven't seen anything about that bill, but it seemed like it was discussed quite a bit last month. But so we're just going through some things, and I know in House Bill 1001, which was our budget bill. It was over 200 pages. Went over to the Senate, and they're going to look at that and have amendments and so forth. And then getting down to the last part of the long session, those last 2 weeks when it gets into conference committee reports and so forth, that's when a lot is really worked out. And so sometimes that bill goes from 200 pages to well over 300-400 really, with when it's all said and done. But a lot of good will come out of that. But when you've got the kind of money that we have to appropriate, allocate, it takes a lot of work behind the scenes, and I think that's what's important. But one thing about also over the last summer, I was in a parade at in Steinsville, the Stone Quarry Festival parade, as well as the Gosport parade. And this lady came up to me while I'm handing out candy to people, asked about the textbook fees. But, Representative, we need to fund the textbooks. Well, that's what we did in House Bill 1001, and the local Democrats in Vigo County, they bashed us for that because they said, well, we didn't fund it. Well, we did put it in a school funding formula. And for just giving an idea, in in Vigo County, the average cost for books per student was like $105 per year. And we actually funded well over that. But it's not spelled out on a line item situation. But as far as here in Spencer Owen Community Schools, Derek, you might be interested in this, but we funded per student $547 per student, and another $194, excuse me, as far as the next year. That's fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 23 here in Owen County. So for a total of $738 per student of new funding. So the money will be there, and then you guys can take it from there, and how you would allocate and distribute that money and so forth. But the state of Indiana doesn't want to say to the locals, well, okay, here's what you got to do with this money and so forth. You guys are elected, you make those decisions, and I think that's what is important to do. So everybody has their viewpoints on that. But there's and as I mentioned to Kim Fiddler last month, about $1.6 billion of new dollars going into K through 12 education. And so anyway, but a lot going on in the next few weeks, and so stay tuned, and I appreciate everybody being here this morning. Thank you.
Anton, if I can say one other thing just real quick, and I want to say this to encourage all of you and people that are listening to continue to bring ideas and knowledge to us. Sometimes I think the assumption is well, you're a state senator, or you're a state representative, you know everything about how state government works and how funding works and how things are paid for and what grants there are and what the requirements are for the grants. But we got to be honest with you. I don't know all that information, but yet you have that information. Bruce just came to me about an issue with respect to rural water, and the fact that nonprofit rural water entities, it's more difficult for them to get state grants for water projects than it is other, let's say, municipalities, for example. And so that's great information. I wasn't aware of that, but because he mentioned it this morning, I've got it as a note, and he's going to send me an email about it so it doesn't fall through the cracks. We'll have that discussion because in my mind, my first thought is, why should it be more difficult for a nonprofit rural water to get a grant through the state government for a water project than it is maybe a local municipality, for example? And so I'm going to encourage you to continue to bring those ideas to us. I wasn't aware of that, but I am now, and that at least gets it on our radar screen to try to see if there's something we can do to improve that. So I encourage all of you to continue to bring those kind of ideas to us. So, but anyway, I'll turn it back over to Anton.
All right, so let's jump right into our Q&A. We do have a light group of attendees in person, which is okay, because we'll be able to get questions from pretty much everybody that has one. And we also have online options, too, if anybody watching would like to ask a question. Who would like to start us off this morning? Right over here, front row.
I'll go since I guess I got to get the mic up. Good morning. And since we have a light group, it'll be great because my multiple personalities can ask multiple questions. So actually got a couple roles that I'm involved with. I'm involved with the chamber. I'm involved with the water company, as you all know, and then as a citizen of Owen County. So I moved down here almost 5 years ago. Love the trees, love the atmosphere and stuff. One of the things that sticks out to me is when you sit here and you see all the time, we have this huge excess of money and we're going to give back and things like that. And at least 7 or 8 times driving home, a tree has fell in the middle of the highway, and you're going, this is just ridiculous that if we got all this abundance of money in the state, how can we not trim back and get rid of dead trees? Just last week, it stopped, almost hit a FedEx truck right in front of us. And we're not talking little limbs, we're talking big trees. And that's one thing I think, a lot of what I've learned when I moved down here, the area is so much different. Once you get north of 70, just like the rural water companies, there's not a rural water company north of 70 because you can drill a well anywhere. So everybody up there just thinks you can drill a well. Well, you get up there, there's very few issues with clearing trees. There's very few issues with right-of-ways because they went through the middle of farm fields and things. Down here, everything's went through the middle of a woods. And that, I think, can get lost in perspective when you guys are in the State House. And I don't know if there's anything, we can do as patrons to help push things like that. But, obviously they have their needs, we have our needs. We're going to have larger needs down here towards things like that, towards rural water, towards some of the things we do that are more challenging, our rural demographics. We don't have as many people per county, so it makes it harder to do things and stuff like that. So that's my thing, is my personal thing is I'd like to see some money come back to take care of some of those things. The roads, as far as, not worried, maybe not looking at the roads so much, but looking at the areas the roads are served with, because we spend a lot of money on roads and bridges, but if a tree falls and kills somebody while they're driving home, it's just, to me, that's just stupid. I mean, it's something we should be taking care of as just patrons of our environment. As a water company, I'm really happy we got $250,000 of ready money. Worked with Marcy from the chamber. A bunch of people from community helped us put that grant together, and it was a really cool thing to watch the people in Owen County and different aspects of government come together and write letters of encouragement for us as a rural nonprofit water company, help us obtain them funds. We're going to be putting water down to Lanes Addition. I have letters dating back to 1970 when the water company was incorporated, people asking for water down in Lanes Addition. So it's a sad thing that it took us 51, 52 years to get the water down there, but it's a good thing. It's happening this year. So I just, from that side of it, I think we need to have a passion for serving our neighbors, whether it be with affordable health care, affordable textbooks, clean, safe drinking water, fiber. I mean, we've done a great job putting fiber out in the country. We're worried about having people the ability to be able to work from home, so they got fiber now, but they got to get in a truck and haul their water to their house. It just seems crazy. So I know we can't go everywhere. It's not physically possible, but there's areas where we're definitely underserved, where we could be helping people. And I've gone to DC a lot. I've been around, and it's amazing when you get to your legislatives and things that are people that are, like I said, north of 70. They don't understand. They just cannot comprehend what we're going through. And I'd be willing to come to the House or the Senate and share. I mean, if that need be, I'd be super happy to come talk about the needs, and I can get other people from southern Indiana. It's not just Owen and Monroe. We're talking Brown on down south. There's a lot of people that have needs, and it's good that we're putting money into fiber. It's good that we're doing this stuff, but I was amazed when I come down here. I live on a dirt road, and I have high-speed fiber in the office. The fiber, or we have no fiber. It's terrible, but we're working on that through a different company. But that's my 2 or 3 things that I had.
Just a quick response. Your point's well taken, that different parts of the state have different needs, and I'd never really thought much about the, trees on the state roads. I do drive by, especially after a really windy day, and you see either a tree down or where somebody has clearly cut one off, and I don't know if that was NDOT or somebody's just trying to take care of it, right? Yeah, that's probably the case an awful lot of the time, and so good point. But also with regard to the water is something we need to continue to look at. You can say that fiber is no longer a luxury, it's a necessity, and I believe that, but when you don't have water, that's probably a bigger priority too. So appreciate your comments.
All right, Derek.
Thank you, Marcy. Good morning. A couple of things that I want to talk about today. So Senator Bassler, at the Senate Appropriations Committee hearing the other day, you had the Department of Workforce Development present, and Senator Brown had asked a question that the director didn't know, and I'm sitting there going, I know the answer, ask me. So about the Jobs for America's Graduates program, the question was, Senator Brown's question was, how do we know that we're serving the students most in need with that program? And I can tell you today, here in Region 8, that we are serving the students who are most in need. So the selection criteria for the JAG program involves students who are largely below a 2.0 GPA, have home life issues, social emotional issues, students who are not connected to extracurricular activities. A large majority of our students in the JAG program are not in other activities in school. And so the JAG program really becomes their activity that keeps them engaged in school. And so when it comes to the funding of that program, the dollars spent for that, I think, really do pay off. We do year after year here in Region 8. We're very proud of our results. I can't speak for the other regions in the state, but we regularly outperform the state graduation rate with students who are most in need of help. And so we are not cherry picking success stories to pad our success rate to make us look good. We are serving the kids that are most in need with that. So I hope that we get the full appropriation of what the department is looking for, and wouldn't hurt to have a little more. I know the governor would like to double the size of that program during his tenure, and I would also like to see that in the state. I think if we could serve more students, that would be better off. And then on the school board side of things, the Senate Bill 300, so the residential TIF bill, it's in Ways and Means in the House currently. Question is, I'm not an expert on residential tax increment financing districts. It gives me pause that the language of the bill removes school boards from signing off on residential TIF, because property taxes is a very important thing as we look at our capital improvement projects and things that we use that funding for. Senator Bray, you voted in favor of it. Senator Bassler, you voted against it. My question is to you each is, what's your stance on that, and why did you vote that way? And then in Ways and Means, what's the future of the bill going forward?
Sure, I'd be glad to jump in on a few things. I love it when people know how we voted on bills. That means that you're paying attention. So, and I also, let's talk about the JAG program first. It wasn't until, and this kind of reinforces something I said earlier, it wasn't until about 6 years ago that I started getting involved with education funding that I'd even heard of the JAG program. Or maybe I'd heard of it, but I didn't know what it was. And it was actually a now retired Senator Doug Eckerty was the one that started to get me involved with understanding what the JAG program is. And my sense is it continued to be a very good program, and it does. It has an impact mostly on young people that it gives them an opportunity to start heading down a path that is more productive for them, for society, for the world, than maybe some of the other paths they might start going down, because they're not as involved with other activities, maybe not as involved with sports or drama or those kind of things that tie you in with the community. And so I continue to be very supportive of JAG. Now, I will say that, we always want to take a look at programs. Are they still working? Are they still trying to accomplish what we think they are? Are they really having an impact? Is it a good use of taxpayers' dollars? But I continue to be a fan of the JAG program. I've had some interaction with the young people, some at the State House, some at the local level in the local schools that are in my district, and I continue to be impressed with the work and the impact that has on young people. Now, with respect to the question about TIFs, I've always had a challenging relationship with TIFs in general, and I guess I've had a challenging relationship with them because I've seen some of what I believe is questionable use of TIF dollars. And just one example, when I was on city council before I was a state senator, and I voted against it when I was in city council. They were using TIF dollars to build a spec warehouse right along I-69. And as I looked around, I don't see the private sector failing in providing warehouses. The private sector does a good job of that, so I'm not sure that we should be using government dollars to build warehouses. Here we are now, I guess maybe that was about 11 years ago. It still sits empty. It was about all in. It was about a $10 million project, including the interest on the bonds. So that probably colors my view to a certain extent when it comes to TIFs and how they're used. Furthermore, something that gives me pause is historically, and I mean probably way back in history, at least beyond 10 years ago, maybe back 10, 20, 30 years ago, the initial idea of TIFs was to take brownfield areas, so maybe industrial sites that are no longer being used, and try to clean up those industrial sites, those brownfield areas. Again, just in my limited experience on TIFs, they weren't being used to clean up brownfield areas. They're taking greenfield areas. I mean, open land that quite possibly was going to be developed anyway, and they're using TIF to do that. And so, to your point, if that was going to be developed anyway by the private sector, those dollars would have then, those tax dollars, the property tax dollars, would be then flowing to the various overlapping entities, including the school corporation. So I continue to find TIFs challenging, but I'm in a great minority on this. I think probably many of our members in the Senate, and I assume on the House side also, are generally supportive of TIFs and things along those lines. We've talked about trying to maybe do some type of reform of the TIF process, so examples like I just gave you don't happen. But like most things that we deal with, once you get below the surface, let's reform TIF, boy, it gets really complicated. And to a certain extent, my bottom line is I want locals to do what they want to do, and that's a TIF thing. It's what locals want to do. But just because of some of the challenges experience I've had, they give me pause, and they probably will continue to give me pause in the future. I think those are the two key things you talked about. So, but appreciate you being here, and thanks for continuing to bring questions to us, and thank you for knowing how I vote on bills. So.
Yeah, it's not hidden, is it? No, nor should it be. That's a really good assessment of TIFs from Senator Bassler, and as he said, there's two schools of thought, even in the Republican side of the chamber, on TIFs, and my experience has been a little different. Maybe because in my day job outside of the State House, I'm a lawyer and have represented a lot of redevelopment commissions over the years, and we've worked with TIFs and somewhat to some good success. And without a doubt, there are some abuses or some good examples about some communities that are probably not doing it correctly. I can speak to one where in Morgan County where we did one, and it's worked out really well so far. And the idea was take an area that is pretty rural and not particularly affluent, and everybody there had small lots and septic systems that weren't succeeding at all. And so you put a TIF around it. And so if people understand what a TIF is, and most of you in this room do, but there might be some people online that don't, is you take a geographic area and you kind of draw a line around it, and you say, okay, any increase in property tax from development of that will be captured so it can be used just for that space for something. And so if you do an investment, this allows the local government to make an investment to put something in there, and that will bring some development, that will increase the property tax, and that increase in property tax can be used to fund that project, which would never have been able to be funded in the first place. And so what we did was you take this area, and then you put in a sanitary sewer system. This was a really small one. In fact, the engineers, as we cut the ribbon, said this is kind of a baby system. But it has already begun to really grow the area because it's made the area now viable, because it just wasn't going to be beforehand. And I think from my perspective, at least, that's what you want. And with regard to the residential TIF, that's kind of a new idea to do it for residences. But one of the significant problems around the state is costs or the availability of housing, especially affordable housing or workforce housing. And so this TIF is one idea. There are others, but one idea to help encourage that to happen so that you can do just what I said, draw a line around it in an area where you think housing and affordable housing makes some sense. As that housing goes in, that increases the property tax. The property taxes can be used to pay for the cost of the infrastructure that would go in there: roads, water, sanitary sewer, those sorts of things. And so there is a benefit to that, and there's a benefit to schools, even if they don't have like a sign-off power, a veto power. I can't quite remember the phrase you used, but because as you bring that housing there, you're going to bring students there, and every student's going to that goes to your school that's in that area is another $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 or more that goes to you as a result of that increase in the population. So there's still a benefit there, and there's a long-standing dispute as to what exactly the role the schools have in those TIFs, because it's property tax and it does impact the schools, but we think in a positive way. And so overall, given the idea that the housing is necessary, is the main reason that I voted for the bill.
And Bob, you're not off the hook because this bill went into your committee. So.
What was it again? 300? Was that the number? Well, yeah. I haven't seen it yet, and we've been looking at some bills from the Senate right now in Ways and Means, just like the other day. But I think Representative Bob Cherry from Hancock County, he had a bill the first half, House Bill 1085. And you're familiar with that, Derek? Yeah, and I'm sure you did watch that. Well, being the majority whip, I was whipping up votes for that, and didn't happen. And it's just like in what Senator Bray mentioned, and Senator Bassler. There's people that love TIFs, and there's people that hate TIFs, and there's a few in between. Sometimes I'm the one in between, not to sound like a politician, but there are some good points about it. But you think about TIFs in the state of Indiana. I think 6 years ago we had 800 of them. Now we have like 1,200 in 5-6 years. So look at that trend, and why is it? Because give me that money and so forth, and I get that, and so but we'll see how Senate Bill 300, if it does land over in the committee, but I appreciate the insight and to take a look at that.
Go ahead.
It goes back to the fact that most things we deal with, not just in the legislative perspective, but just in life, are shades of gray, aren't they? Things tend not to be real black and white. And Senator Bray gave a great example of, I think, man, it's a good use of TIF. And so in some ways, if we could somehow eliminate the example I had going forward and have more of what, like Senator Bray said, and I'm sure that Senator Representative Heaton's got some in his district that have worked out well also, that would be the ideal situation. And there's been some senators that have talked about whether we should try to get our arms around that so we have more of the you know, the waterworks, sewer type projects, roads, curbs, what have you, and less of the things that I've seen historically would be beneficial to everybody. But we're cognizant of the fact that that does have an impact on the overlapping taxing districts, and we'll continue to try to work through that and make them as good as possible. But good question, and thanks for your input.
And I'll jump in on this one because this is an important bill to us in county government. And from our perspective, we don't have that revenue opportunity on the student, that relationship. We're just flat out providing county services. And especially if you have a residential TIF where you have a much higher concentration of individuals or entities that would be utilizing those services, that's where our biggest concern comes in. And that's why we as counties advocate for having a seat at the table. We want to have that opportunity to say yes or no or offer our opinion in a formal process. And we also would advocate that we have some kind of a small pass-through of some sort where the revenue, there's a certain minimum that then flows through and back to the county unit or the school for that matter to cover, at least cover the cost, the added cost of providing services. And that's why we hope that there could be some amendments or adjustments to modify, because TIFs are a very valuable tool in the process. They're very valuable. And to the point that Senator Bray made, wouldn't it be more reasonable to allow the community to decide and to allow all of the stakeholders to have a say in the process? And what may work for one community may not for another. And so having that flexibility, having a pass-through, having a seat at the table would make that bill much better and I think more attractive to a broader number of individuals. So that's just our opinion on that.
Can I, Anton, I've got a question or maybe ask for a little more insight on that. So if you're talking about a TIF that's out in the county, then that would be, I mean, a city like the town of Spencer couldn't do that. It would have to be the County Redevelopment Commission. And, you know, those aren't elected officials. They're appointed, but they're most appointed by the county. And I can't tell you right now, I should know, but exactly who appoints all the people on there, but it's commissioners and council and folks like that. Okay.
School board, the ex officio member.
Yeah.
3 members are appointed by the commissioners and 2 by the council.
So yeah, gotcha. Yeah, that kind of sounds right to me. So given that it's appointed by the county, is it still creating problems for you?
Yeah, so county specific is not really where the issue is because we already have that ability. It's if a city or town or municipality would then inject, because then that's a decision they're making that then affects the county, but then doesn't allow for that say or that discussion. So,
okay. And
we have one county TIF in Owen County, and that's right across the street here with Hoosier Energy, and it worked perfectly. And it's for a specific use and has one expense to be covered from that. But as you know, TIFs can be a lot more complicated,
yes.
And there can be layers to that. And especially when you get into a city or town origin TIF, then the financial complications begin to occur. And that's where we want to make sure we have. Otherwise, you might have a land grab or the ability to, why not TIF everything, you know? And then that could really go too far in shutting down other local units' abilities to cover costs. So that's kind of where the focus is.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, any other discussions on this? Okay, Jeff, next question.
I'm going to stand up because I can barely talk anyway, so maybe I can be heard better this way. So good morning, Senator Bray, Senator Bassler, and Representative Heaton. This morning is show and tell time for me, okay? First of all, I want to thank you and you, Marcy, and everybody who has been involved in this and the people at SCI REMC, because the fiber project is moving right along. I would really encourage you, if you have other opportunities to fund broadband, and I know you're doing it, keep it up. So here's the story, brief story. Here's the cable. You think, oh, that's the fiber cable. Well, no, this is a line that they use to figure out where the cable's, that's made out of copper. And then here's something to keep the thing from bending too much. And then here's something to enclose the fiber. And here, way out here, what you can't see is the fiber, okay? So the interesting piece of this is this thing runs, I got mine last week, runs at 1 gigabit per second today. Current technology will be 40 times as fast. 40 times as fast through that little fiber, okay? It is transformational, and thank you all for doing it. Thanks to everybody for doing that. So that's the show and tell, and I'll leave that up there at the end so you can look at it. See, I don't think you guys can you see the fiber? If I wag it, I don't know if you can actually see it, but anyway, it's way out here. Okay. So thank you for that. Now, this is going to seem disjointed, but it isn't, okay? So the fiber is going to change our internet delivery throughout the state. There's a bill that both Senator Bray and Senator Bassler voted for in the Senate called SB 12. SB 12 deals with minor material that could be offensive to minors, right? It's now in the House. I oppose it for a couple of reasons. The first is that it excludes the internet, okay? I understand why. You guys don't have any control over the darn internet, okay? But the legislature is plugging a leak in an overflow tube of a levee while the entire levee was breached 10 feet south, okay? The internet is a much bigger threat to our children than a library book or something that a librarian has in a school. Much, much, much bigger threat. So, second, it makes it a level 6 felony if the school continues to display the book. If you're going to add a list of white-collar felonies, this seems pretty extreme. I mean, have you ever seen a librarian do something more threatening than shh, you in the library? Okay. Seriously, you took the exemption for schools out of SB 12, and so those people, if they continue to behave this way, whatever this way is, they could be charged with a felony, a level 6 felony. And if we're going to have level 6 felonies for white-collar crimes, I think I'd rather add it somewhere else. Okay. I do like one thing about this bill. It establishes a clear appeal process. The libertarian in me wants to know how to appeal those things that we believe our government has overreached on, and they've been committed by members of the bureaucracy. Transitioning, the current Division of Forestry appeal process for the Division of Forestry is to continue to write comments that are countered and effectively rejected. I feel like Demi Moore in A Few Good Men with, I strenuously object, okay? It doesn't matter, okay? There is no next level in current appeal process for most government agencies except the governor or you folks, and you've all experienced that problem from me, okay? And then finally, I would ask you, and I'd ask you to comment on this, is there something you can do to cause the Division of Forestry to act more like an entity running the forests for the benefit of Hoosiers, instead of running it like a business where they own 158,000 acres of forest? That would be helpful. I mean, maybe you could ask the Division of Forestry to go identify the trees along the road and then tell the landowners, you probably need to cut those down. I mean, we've had a big emerald ash borer infestation, and that's probably where all of these trees are falling. Is there something you can do to help the DOF act more like an entity running the forest, FBO, for the benefit of, as opposed to as an independent business where they own 158,000 acres? Thank you.
There's a lot there, Jeff. I don't know if we've got time to get that one answered or not. Let me take a crack at it. I'm going to answer I'm going to address the last one first, and then I'll get around to Senate Bill 12 too. But you make a good point. We've had, you and I and some of your friends as well have had some conversations about the Division of Forestry. And then as a result, I've had a conversation with the Division of Forestry, and I know Senator Bassler and Representative Heaton have had as well. So and I also know it's not where you want it to be. But based on those conversations, we'll continue to try and put some pressure on them to be more user-friendly and look at it in more of a light of, they are kind of managing an asset that is owned by the citizens of Indiana rather than it's an asset that they own and can do what they want with. Because it's a fair perspective, and so we'll try and stay on that for you. With regard to Senate Bill 12, the one thing that you said, you said some things that are accurate, but one thing that you said is it makes this a level 6 felony, and it doesn't. It does take the defense away, which is a little bit of a challenge for me, I suppose, but here's a little perspective. So, and I'll say this too with regard to Senate Bill 12, is it needs some work. As it left the Senate, it's probably not perfect. This is one of those bills that Representative Heaton, if they choose to move it at all, can maybe perhaps make it better. But Senate Bill 12 is a thing that says for school libraries and for county libraries as well. Currently in law right now, as it should be, there are things that are obscene or deemed harmful to minors. And it's hard to define both of those things, but we're talking about pornography. If it's obscene or harmful to minors, then it's illegal to give that material to a minor. If I were out on the street here, just out on State Road 43 and did that, it would be a felony for me to do that, and our society has decided that's valuable. I kind of think it is. And but there has been a defense in school libraries, universities, and colleges and things for research and education, just to avoid that kind of risk. And whether or not that defense of education needs to be done or not is a question of some debate. But just make sure everybody knows we're not talking about books that are good literature that have some offensive things in it. The examples, these are things that are already against the law. They have, based on the wording in the law and also the U.S. Supreme Court, things that have no literary or educational value. They're just obscene. And the books that some parents put under my nose were obscene. There's not anybody in this room that think they need to be given those to a 12-year-old child. So those are the things that are focused on here. The language probably isn't right, but the idea, and you can debate whether or not taking that educational defense out is right or not. The bottom line is, never has there been, or I do think ever there will be, a librarian that's getting carted off to jail, because the idea of what's obscene or what's harmful to minors is not a clearly drawn line. Some things do begin to get a little cloudy. Some are clear, but maybe not everything. And so there's a judgment call there, and I just don't see a scenario where that's going to happen to a librarian. But the wording of the bill could be better. Without a doubt, the wording of the bill could be better. And the best part of it, and really probably if you just had this part of it, is that appeal process. If you have a bill that's in your school, or excuse me, a book that's in your school library that you think is offensive or obscene, and you go to the librarian and say, hey, my son brought this home or checked this out, and this is out of bounds, and they don't do anything about it, then appeal to the principal, and then ultimately appeal to the school board and make them respond in writing, because people have appealed that to a school board and they're taken it to the attention, and the school boards haven't done anything about it, not in Owen County, but in different jurisdictions in Indiana. But if you make, some of the books I saw, if you make a school board say in writing that book is okay, the school board will never do it. Those books are too far out of bounds. And so that is the magic in Senate Bill 12, is that process. And Representative Heaton in the House will do what they think is right on that bill. But if that's where it landed, I think that's the best spot. I've taken a crack at addressing a couple of your issues. I'll stop there, and if anybody else wants to as well.
Well, Jeff, thanks for the heads up on that. Senate Bill 12, I think, was that Senator Tom's? Was that his bill? And I think, was there testimony? I think went for hours. This is what I heard. And yeah, we'll take a look at it. I think Representative Becky Cash is the sponsor of the bill. that's still up for debate, I think, maybe. But yeah, it's, we've been talking behind the scenes a little bit about the bill, but we'll get into it, I imagine, in the next week or so. I don't know. I'm really not working behind the scenes with leadership in the House, but just kind of what I hear. But it's something, and I've talked to Senator Toms and his wife, Margie, I think a month or so ago. They mentioned it. I saw them on the street or something, but they mentioned about how important it is. But, you know, versus in the school library versus across the street, you know, if those two things, dealing with this type of material and the harm that it affects young kids. But I think we're going to bring it up, and but how it's going to work out, I don't know at this time.
I'll comment on a couple of the things you brought up, and may as well start about with Senate Bill 12, since that's what Senator or Representative Heaton left off with there. That is a complicated issue. Senator Bray may know the quote much better than I do, since he's an attorney, but I think it was a U.S. Supreme Court justice that was talking about pornography, and I think he or she said, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. And that goes to the point that it is complicated. You know, where does art end and pornography begin, or where does good literature end and pornography begin? I mean, there's some, as anybody who's familiar with the Old Testament, there's some pretty sultry stuff in the Old Testament, you know. So, but I thought long and hard about this specific bill, and to a certain extent, I think it came down to almost one word that was in the bill, and this would be what I would hope that the House might try to address. And I think the phrase, it was maybe material that's inappropriate or inappropriate material. And I would much rather see that be, take the word inappropriate out and put obscene or pornographic in. Because the challenge I have with inappropriate is there are things that very well could be inappropriate for, especially thinking about elementary school children, but yet is valuable information. For example, there might be some pictures of Holocaust victims. There might be pictures or information about maybe the way slaves were treated during slavery. And some people might think, boy, that's inappropriate. Well, okay. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but it's not pornographic, it's not obscene material. So that was the key word that bothered me about that bill. I did vote for it, but I'm hoping my friend to the left here can improve it on his side of the building, fix it for us, you know. And then let's see, a couple other things that I want to maybe touch on. You're right about fiber optics. I had a chance probably about a year or so ago to meet with the then new president of Purdue University. He's kind of touring the state, and his goal is to be in every county, all 92 counties, I think, in his first 2 years that he's president, or maybe first 3 years, something like that. He was in one of the counties in my district, so I was meeting with him, and he asked, and again, all of you know my district, and for that matter, the Representative Heaton's district and Senator Bray's district, mostly small communities, rural areas. And he asked, what do I think is one of the #1 opportunities that the small rural areas have in Indiana when it comes to economic development and success of communities? And I talked to him about the fact, and again, this is kind of post-pandemic, right, about the fact that with fiber optic cables, we can work anywhere. And we still have lots of people that are still working remote. I know people that work for companies in St. Louis, but they live in a rural Pennsylvania. Now, that wouldn't have happened 5 years ago. And so I still think that the more fiber optics we can get out into our communities, to our Main Street areas where our businesses are located, but also under our homes, the more likely it is that someone's going to live on some country road in Owen County, Indiana, and they work for a company in Indianapolis or Chicago or New York for that matter. So I still think there's real opportunity there. And I think all three of us would agree that we're going to try to continue to push funding towards bringing fiber optics and high-speed internet access throughout rural Indiana. Now, with respect to forestry, yeah, this is just kind of a little side comment, and Jeff, you and I have talked about this. One thing that I've always found challenging when it comes to, let me back up just for a second. You get more of something when you incent it. Okay, so let's talk about money. So when you give money for something, you tend to get more of it, whether it's good behavior or bad behavior, good actions or bad actions. When money's involved, people will do more of whatever that activity is. And so one funding mechanism I've always found very challenging for the Division of Forestry, and I'm going to have this discussion with some of my Senate colleagues, and I have had it, and I will continue to have it, is the mechanism that we have put in place. And I get it was before I was here, and maybe before Bob was here, maybe before Rob was here. The mechanism is that the more trees they cut down, the more money they have to spend. Well, if that's the incentive that's put in place, I mean, it's hard not to either consciously or subconsciously think, man, we could use a few extra dollars to do X with, so we're going to cut down some more trees to do that. Now, I don't know that anybody's pure enough not to be, not to let that have an impact on their decision. So my inclination would be, let's take a look at what the Division of Forestry has earned from selling trees some time period. Let's say the last 4 years, the last 6 years, the last 10 years. Average that out and put a line item in the budget for the Division of Forestry for that amount. I don't know if it's $1 million, I don't know if it's $5 million, I have no idea what that number is, but put that line item in the budget and then say, okay, now that you have that line item, any trees you cut down, the proceeds from that would go to the general fund. It would at least take that incentive out of cutting down trees. I'm hoping that they're managing the forest just as exactly as they should be, but because of the mechanism we put in place, it's at least tempting to maybe cut down a few more trees than they would otherwise cut down. Why? Because they're going to have money then, or excuse me, we're going to have more money then. So I'm going to continue to try to work on getting that in the budget going forward, just to try to take that, what I think is an incentive that can lead to some unintended consequences out of the equation. But yet, we still want to fund them. We love our forests, especially in southern Indiana. That's where almost all of our forests are. We still want to fund them like we have in the past. We don't want to make it a hindrance, but at least it takes that conflict of interest out. So that's one thing about forestry that I thought you might be interested in hearing about. So, but thanks for your questions.
All right, do we have any online questions at all? Okay. Anybody else would like to ask a question? We're getting into our final 10, 15 minutes of our session this morning, so keep that in mind. Nicole, go ahead.
Hi. So this isn't really a question, and I know you guys get a lot of complaints and people trying to have problems solved. This is a problem that's being solved in Owen County that I wanted to share. About a year ago, collectively, we have started working on a nonprofit news outlet with the demise of the local newspaper, which I could go on and on about all of the bad implications, but it includes increased rates of poverty and lower median income rates. We are working on that, and it's been through local partnerships, and this will mean that it is one of the most rural and small nonprofit newspapers, not just in Indiana, but possibly in the country from my research. So it's really exciting here.
Good job solving that problem.
Yeah, well done. With regard to that, we've watched nonprofits begin to crop up at the State House and produce news, and doing it on a pretty as high a level as anybody else that's up at the Indiana State House right now. And so maybe that's a path forward. The idea of having journalism and reporting happen in smaller communities and rural communities is really important. And I say that because even if they end up beating up on the three of us or anybody else, that's how that is supposed to go, right? And communities that have people reporting on the county council or the city council or things like that, or the school boards, it just matters. And it's becoming less and less so. It's becoming a serious challenge. So kudos to you. I think that's fantastic. And I wish you all the luck in the world.
Daryl is also on our board, so I just wanted to share.
Well done, Daryl.
That being said, I did some math in my head last night, believe it or not. I worked for compensation for pay for 64 years of my life. My first job was as a 12-year-old sixth grader, passing an Indianapolis Star route every morning of the week. That transitioned to mowing lawns in my neighborhood. I mowed up to 30 lawns a few of those years, and I'm not going to go through my whole work history, but I've had a very, I think, unique, very blessed life growing up here in Spencer, in Owen County, and it's very thrilling to me to see the progress that we've been making in the last several years, largely thanks to Marcy and our community foundation, and we just have so many individuals and organizations working together in this community. We really miss the evening world, and I'm thrilled to be a part of a project that will try to fill some of that gap so our community starts to have a safe venue and a reliable venue for getting information. You know, this whole not-for-profit news outlet and exactly how to describe it, I'm not sure yet. We're doing research around the country to look at other models that have been successful and see if we can adapt components of that for our local community. But we want to remain 100% objective, politically apolitical, you know, politically neutral. So if we're beating up on you, it's over a specific issue. I want to go on to add, as a kid, I wasn't political at all, and when I graduated and was going to IU, I sought a summer job working for the state highway as an engineer's assistant on the 4-lane project up between Martinsville and Mooresville. That was back in the 60s. But what I found out is I had to go to the precinct committee person in Owen County and get his signature on my job application. And along with that, he made it very clear that he was going to expect a percentage back to the county government, and a percentage had to go to the state. You probably remember patronage. So Democrats were in charge at that time, so I thought of myself as a Democrat for many, many years. Somewhere along the line, my party alliances shifted, and I thought I was a Republican because I was kind of disillusioned with some of the things the Democrats were doing. And probably 15, 20 years ago, I thought, I'm not really a Republican, I'm a libertarian. And I ultimately realized those labels are very constrictive. They don't represent me because my views today go from the far, well, maybe not far right, go from the mid-right to the mid-left. I tend to be a fiscal conservative, but a social liberal. And in talking to a lot of my friends around here, I think that represents a significant number of Hoosiers. But to your point earlier, the gray area. When I was in my 40s, I thought I was sure of so many things, but as I've gotten older, I become less certain. I think there's a lot more gray areas in our lives than many of us tend to think of. But that being said, I do want to urge you and caution you, please try not to be overly influenced by the far right of the Republican Party, nor should you be influenced by the far left of the Democratic Party. That contentiousness doesn't serve anybody's purpose but their own. So just try to remain objective and remember there's a lot of Hoosiers out here that they may not be vocal, they may not be active, but they're pretty much middle of the road politically. I will also want to urge you to work with the State Forestry Department to urge them to find a way to leave some of our forest alone. I'm trained as a scientist. I taught science for 9 years at the high school level. I still read scientific journals. And what we have learned about our biosphere, and ecology, and the complicated relationships of all the organisms, most of them invisible and underground, under the leaves, I don't think we know enough to manage a state forest. I think we need to take some of these areas and just leave them alone. Not because there's any bad intentions, because we don't know how to manage it. And I think we see some of the repercussions of that out west with all the huge forest fires because we tried to manage those forests for years and put out forest fires, which were a natural part of that forest ecology and evolution. One final point. I really would like to see our federal and state government get out from in between patients and doctors, especially when it comes to reproduction rights. I think that's a personal issue. I think it's a medical issue. And and I could go on at length why I've come to this, particular position. It's very sticky, it's a very contentious argument, but I'm just not sure the government needs to get in the middle of that. And finally, as a little bit of my libertarian nature, it seems that you guys are doing a great job. You go in there every year and you try to take care of the big issues, but every year the big issues become, I think, smaller and smaller and smaller. And I just wish that the state, and especially the federal government, wouldn't try to insert themselves into our lives to such a high degree as they do right now. So I think Hoosiers by nature are independent thinkers, they're hard workers, and they like to come together and get things done. And I feel strongly that local is a much better solution to most of our problems than either the state or certainly the federal government. The more local control we can have, the better. And that spills over to schools. And I'm almost done, Marcy. Give as much control to our school systems as you can to our local school boards, because there's not one set of rules, regulations, guidelines that work across the state. Certainly not in Fort Wayne or downtown Indianapolis and here in Owen County. What our schools need, what our kids need and expect, they're going to be different. So as much as you can, leave that control to our local school boards. Oh, one final point. I promise this is the last one. Do everything you can to keep school board positions from becoming political. They need to be elected at large. And if you're thinking about political parties and county offices, let's go the other way. Why do we need a Republican or Democratic sheriff, auditor, surveyor, clerk? Those really aren't party positions in my view. So give that some thought. Instead of making it more political, let's take some of these local offices and move them away from that. So thank you very much. I feel better.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different subjects in there, and that's a great one to wrap up with. And I will say, with respect to coverage of what public officials do and what's going on in our community, it is Sunshine Week, and that is a great opportunity to cast light on our government and the inner workings of things. And it's important to remember that and do what we can to make sure our public are informed and know what we're doing on their behalf. So with that, are there any closing statements that you might want to make before we adjourn here this morning? I will say that the next fourth and final legislative breakfast is April the 15th, and that's going to be here at this location. We really appreciate the Owen Valley Christian Fellowship for hosting our location. It works out very well. We also appreciate Marcus Robinson and Edward Jones for being our sponsor, and of course the Chamber of Commerce for organizing these events. So with that, thank you all for coming out, and safe travels home.